Hello, and welcome back to Weston the Historian. Today I'm going to be once again talking about my book Violet Sorrows. When this video is released, it will be over 2 months since I published Violet Sorrows. So please go check out Violet Sorrows on Amazon. It's only $10, and it's a brief read. It's only 33 poems, 46 pages of poetry. But I really hope you read this. I hope you buy it, I hope you read it, and I hope you love it and enjoy it. But anyway, I'm not going to be talking about the individual poems this time. Most of my videos where I've been talking about it have been talking about that. But I don't want to talk about that, and I don't even want to talk about myself. I actually want to talk about the poets and musicians that I put at the very end that I said influenced me. So, this is a weird list because it's a personal list. It's my list of artists that have inspired me personally. So most of these artists have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But I put them all because I was like, these are great, and I like all of them. So anyway, starting off, I put Edgar Allan Poe. So Edgar Allan Poe, everyone knows who Edgar Allan Poe is. You know, Gothic American writer, basically invented the short story The Raven. He's very well known. The Fall of the House of Usher, very very well known writer. People know Edgar Allan Poe. So Edgar Allan Poe, when I first started writing poetry, I did not know poetry very well. It was not really something I read much of, and it wasn't something I had engaged with much. All that I knew was I wasn't a big fan of modern Instagram poetry, but I was still sad. I was still, you know, sorrowful. Violet sorrowful, some might say. But all I knew was I was not feeling great, but I didn't like the depressing Instagram, TikTok poetry. So I wanted to find something that was dark and gloomy, but wasn't corny. So I went back to the classics. Well, the classics are technically older than Edgar Allan Poe, but I went back to Edgar Allan Poe. I went back to just names I knew. And Edgar Allan Poe is a name everyone knows. Everyone has heard The Raven. Everyone has heard some of his short stories, read some of his short stories. And I remember the year I started writing poetry, we were reading an Edgar Allan short story for my class. And I was the only one in the class who enjoyed it, apparently. It was The Fall of the House of Usher. Apparently everyone else hated it. I loved it. But that story, it was so weird, and it had such an influence on me. I just thought it was beautiful. It was beautifully written. The story itself was beautiful. The idea was beautiful. It was so strange and macabre to me, and I was like, this is awesome and captivating to me. And I started reading more of his poetry and more of his short stories, and I started getting really interested in Edgar Allan Poe. So that was why I listed him in my book. I also want to clarify that this is not in order of, this is not ranked, this is alphabetical. So the next one is Homer. Once again, didn't know much poetry when I started writing poetry, but I knew Homer, I knew the classics. So I started reading the Iliad. The Odyssey I'd read before, uh, but I started reading the Iliad and I loved it. And I remember I watched Troy and I loved it. And of course, my most of the poems in here are not necessarily the kinds of stuff that sounds like what you read from Homer or from any sort of epic poem, whether it's Greek or Mesopotamian or Roman or whatever else. But I decided to list Homer because I think about the Iliad all the time, and that's completely serious. It is just on my brain all the time, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm thinking about the metaphors he uses. The fact that he uses the metaphor of a lion so often is so interesting to me. Um, but I just love Homer, and I love the Iliad, and I don't know. At some point, I would love to write my own epic. We'll see if that happens. But anyway, Next, Ian Curtis, Joy Division. So, I love Joy Division. The lyrics, the actual music is awesome. I've been trying to make music for years, and I've always loved Joy Division for that. I've always loved their sound, but their lyrics specifically, and the feeling that their music gives me has been channeled a lot into poetry. And I remember when I first started writing this, I was listening to a lot of Joy Division, and it was influencing the words that I put onto paper. It was influencing my poetry. The Not even necessarily the lyrics specifically, but just the sound and the gloom of their sound and the bass and the guitar and all the weird noises that they have. Joy Division just had such a tremendous impact on my interests and on the poetry I wrote, and also the music I wrote and the fashion I wear and everything else about my life. I owe a lot to Joy Division and also Bauhaus, and just goth rock and post punk in general. But I wanted to list Joy Division specifically because I like his writing is fantastic, and I one of the only songs that can actually make me cry is by Joy Division, and that song is The Eternal. It's very sad. I don't really feel like telling the story of what happens because, or of what the song is about, because every time I do, it makes me cry. But good song, and Ian Curtis is great. Next up, John Donne. So this is a bit of a weird one because John Donne is a little bit less known, but I've always been a big fan of Baroque art. So when I was a big fan of Baroque art, Baroque music, before I started writing poetry. And once I started writing poetry, I was like, I wonder what Baroque poetry sounds like. And I discovered John Donne, and I was like, this is really pretty. And it's funny because people generally are not a big fan of Baroque poetry and John Donne, but I loved his poetry. I thought it was beautiful and it was beautifully written. Um, Specifically, I love The Flea a lot. It's very cute. It's a little weird, but it's very cute. Very cute poem. It's basically about how two lovers share the same flea. It like drank the blood of both of them, and it's just a funny poem because it's such a weird idea trying to make that sound romantic, but it's really beautiful and I love that. Next up, Michael Gira, the singer vocalist from the Swans. So I love this band. Swans I've listened to for years. Probably one of the most I don't know, menacing bands I've ever heard. Or and I've listened to a lot of music. I love music, but Swans have always struck out as one of the most experimental, one of the most out there, different, unique. They make everything. They've made like neo folk type stuff. They made gothy type of stuff. They've made pure experimental noise. They've made industrial. They've made post rock. They've made pretty much anything and everything. I mean, they've made stuff that sounds like it could be released by totally different bands, and it's just their music is amazing to me. But their lyrics have always struck out to me because their lyrics are so weird and so difficult to understand sometimes. I specifically love and have been inspired by the song Helpless Child. I think it's a beautiful song. It's depressing, and I'm still trying to decipher its lyrics. I've heard a million different interpretations, and I think that's another beautiful thing about poetry and music is the fact that you can have two, three, four different interpretations of the same song, the same poem, the same piece, and they can all be kind of right in their own way because it can mean something different for each person. I think that's beautiful, and I think the Swans do a great job of doing that, of having lyrics which are so weird and bizarre and hard to understand that they can mean something completely different depending on who's listening. So, anyway, next up, Ovid. I don't have as much to say because I haven't read him as much as Homer and some of the other poets. But I remember when I started writing poetry, I was skimming through some of his poems and I was like, this is quite enjoyable. I like this. And I've always been a big fan of the Greek and Roman myths. So Ovid felt like a natural inclusion for this. Next, Phillis Wheatley. So this is another one which is a little out there, not as well known as the others. But Phillis Wheatley was an African American poet during, I believe it was during the colonial period, and she was a slave, but she just has a fascinating story, and I really enjoy her poetry. It's interesting knowing her story and how just it's just a unique story for a poet. And there's not many well-known African American poets, specifically from that time. There weren't a lot of people who were African American writing poetry during that time, and there weren't many slaves who were even able to read or write. So to know about an African American slave who could write poetry is just amazing. Um, so I find her story very interesting, and I find her poetry very interesting. Next up, and this isn't a poet, this isn't a musician, it's not an artist in any sense. Plato. So this is another weird inclusion, but I love Plato. And specifically, I love Plato's Republic. It's a very basic, everyone knows Plato's Republic, but it's a book which I also think about all the time. And it's a book which has stuck with me. And the writing style, the concept of a dialogue, of a philosophical book being a dialogue between different people, is really unique to me, and it's very interesting because before I started reading poetry, or reading philosophy, sorry, I kind of just imagined it would be kind of the way Aristotle writes, which is very matter of fact, just telling you what he thinks, or maybe like an internal dialogue written out on paper. But it was like an actual dialogue with actual characters, and I thought that was interesting. Um, and that, I don't know, Plato's writing, but Plato's philosophy also influenced my poetry. Now I wish I actually had cited a poem which has reference, which I, you know, had Plato in mind specifically. I'm sure there is something. I would have to find it, but his philosophy has definitely impacted the way I think, and it's impacted the way I write, which is definitely weird because in Plato's Republic, he basically proposes kicking out all the poets, but I digress. Next up, William Blake. Songs of Innocence and Experience. Not only that, but his art. It always struck me as crazy looking and very interesting, um, very unique, and very spiritual. I always found his art very fascinating, very just unique. Like it sticks out. Like you can tell it's him, which is interesting. Uh, I remember after publishing this, I actually reread Songs of Innocence and Experience, and I didn't enjoy it as much. I unfortunately, but his actual art did have a lot of influence in the way I think and view the world. I just this kind of weird spiritual view of art and man and nature. It's just very interesting to me, and it's definitely impacted the way I view the world. Next up and last up is Yukio Mishima. So Yukio Mishima, I read Sun and Steel. It was my freshman year of high school, and I loved it. And I loved the way he wrote. What I especially loved was it was prose, but it was written like poetry. It felt like reading poetry. It was so beautiful and so artistic and so well said that even though it was prose, it was basically poetry. And it was a beautifully written book. And there are plenty of poems in here that are very obviously inspired by Yukio Mishima and Sun and Steel specifically. But I just was so fascinated by that book and by him as a person. He was a very strange person. He died by seppuku because he tried to overthrow the government. Very fascinating person. But anyway, I digress. At some point, I would love to make individual videos on every single poet and author and musician that I mentioned in this video, but that time will come later. So, with all of that being said, I hope you all enjoyed this and enjoyed me talking about people that have influenced me and my work. And I hope you all buy my book and read it. I hope you all enjoy it. But thank you for watching. Goodbye.